In the middle of a courtroom, my own brother Julian pointed at me and told the judge, "My sister, a Green Beret officer, has lost her mind." He wanted to strip me of my honor, my freedom, my entire life. But what he didn't know was that his crazy little sister had brought a sealed envelope with her, one that held an arrest warrant for him straight from the Pentagon. My name is Carly Benson. I'm 35 years old, and I was sitting in a place I swore I would never belong. A courtroom witness stand. The air in the Fayetteville courthouse was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood polish and a tension you could almost taste. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my knuckles white. My attire was a simple dark navy suit, my civilian uniform I called it. It was a stark, disciplined contrast to the scene unfolding before me. My brother, Julian, stood addressing the judge, his reflection gleaming in the polished wood of the lectern. He was a portrait of success in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my first car. Beside him, his wife, Serafina, sat in the front row, a perfect statue of concern in an understated Chanel dress. Julian adjusted his silk tie, a small, deliberate movement of a man in complete control. He began his well-rehearsed speech, his voice trembling with a practiced sorrow that made my stomach turn. He looked at the judge, but every so often his eyes would flick to me, filled not with love, but with a cruel, condescending pity. "I love my sister, Your Honor," he began, the words echoing in the hushed room. "It's because of that love, a painful love, that I have to stand here today." He paused, letting the weight of his supposed burden settle over the court. "The trauma of war, it's a terrible thing. It has changed her. It took the sister I knew. She's not our Carly anymore." My heart didn't break. It went cold, like a block of ice forming in my chest. He was dissecting me, turning my life into a tragic story where he was the reluctant hero. Then came the weapon. Julian's lawyer, a slick man from Raleigh whose smile never quite reached his eyes, cued the clerk. The prosecution presents its first piece of evidence. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying grainy, shaky footage from a cell phone. There I was, a solitary figure moving through the dense woods of the Uwharrie National Forest. It was night, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the tall pines. My lips were moving, my voice a low, inaudible murmur. The camera angle was unsteady, invasive, clearly filmed without my knowledge. Julian's voice, now laced with profound sadness, narrated the scene. "She talks to herself, Your Honor. For hours, she wanders the woods at night. She's haunted by ghosts from her past." Ghosts. He dared to call them ghosts. He didn't tell the court that the video was taken on the anniversary of Corporal Leo Santiago's death. He didn't explain that I wasn't talking to myself. I was performing a sacred, personal ritual. I was breathing their names into the night: Santiago, Miller, Chen, the men from my unit who never came home. It was a prayer, a roll call for the fallen, the only way I knew how to keep their memory from being swallowed by silence. From the corner of my eye, I saw Serafina daintily lift a silk handkerchief to her face, dabbing at a tear that wasn't there. Crocodile tears for a perfect performance. They had taken my most profound grief, the very core of my honor and my pain, and twisted it into a symptom of madness. They were painting me as unstable, a broken thing to be pitied and controlled. But the final fatal blow was yet to come. The lawyer placed a thick stack of papers on the judge's bench with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel in the silent room. On top, clearly visible, was a psychiatric evaluation. The letterhead was from a prestigious clinic in Cary, that wealthy suburb near Raleigh where Seraphina's family had connections. It was signed by a doctor I had never met in my life. I could see the words even from a distance. Clinical damning terms leaped off the page: borderline personality disorder, systematic delusions, paranoid ideations likely stemming from severe PTSD. Each phrase was a nail being hammered into the coffin of my identity. I watched the judge's face. I saw his expression shift from stern professionalism to a slow, creeping mixture of doubt and pity. He looked from the report to me and then back again. His gaze was different now. The entire room's gaze was different. The clerk, the bailiff, the strangers in the gallery, they were all looking at me not as Major Carly Benson, a decorated Green Beret, but as a ticking time bomb. A poor, lost veteran who had finally snapped. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at me, his voice softened with the kind of condescension one uses for a frightened child. "Ms. Benson," he said gently, "do you have anything to say?" I met his gaze. I looked at my brother, whose face was a mask of feigned concern. I looked at my sister-in-law, the architect of this public execution. 1,000 furious replies screamed in my mind. 1,000 truths burned on my tongue. But I said nothing. I just sat there, in perfect, unbreachable silence. My silence wasn't an admission. It was the greatest contempt I could offer their ridiculous play. And the calm before a storm I knew was coming. After all, this wasn't the first time he tried to erase me. It started a long, long time ago. The silence of the courtroom faded, pulling me back through time, back to a small timber house nestled at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. That house wasn't one home, it was 2 separate worlds existing under a single roof. First, there was Julian's world. In it, he was the golden child, the crown prince, the pride of our family line. Every achievement of his, no matter how small, became a story our parents would tell and retell to the neighbors over the fence. His first Little League trophy sat on the mantelpiece like a holy relic. His acceptance letter to a summer camp was framed. Every mistake was swiftly erased, smoothed over with excuses. When he crashed Dad's truck into the fence, it was, "Boys will be boys, you know how they are." When he failed a major exam, it was because the teacher clearly had it in for him. He lived in a world of endless sunlight, of constant approval, and then there was my world, a world of shadows. I had to work twice as hard for half the attention. When I brought home a report card full of straight A's, the response was a curt, "Good, keep it up." When I scored the winning basket in a high school basketball game, the advice was, "Just don't get yourself injured." I was the supporting actress in the grand play of Julian's life. My mother's words were a constant refrain, a quiet chant that set the course of my childhood. "You're the girl, Carly. You have to be patient, to yield, to look after your brother. One day he'll be a big success, and you'll need to be able to lean on him." She didn't mean for support, she meant for survival. My purpose was to orbit his star. The sharpest of these memories, the one that still feels like a shard of glass in my heart, is from a Thanksgiving evening. The house was warm, filled with the cozy, all-American smells of roast turkey, cinnamon-dusted sweet potato casserole, and my mother's famous pumpkin pie. Laughter from the living room, the drone of the football game on TV, it was the picture of holiday perfection. But my heart was cold as ice. After dinner, my father stood up, cleared his throat, and tapped his glass for attention. He ceremoniously announced Julian's gift for getting into UNC Chapel Hill. He walked to the hall closet and came back holding a set of keys, a used but pristine Ford Mustang. The room erupted in applause. Julian, puffed up with pride, snatched the keys from the air with a smug grin. He was the king of the world. A few minutes later, after the excitement died down, I hesitantly pulled something from my backpack. It was a gold medal, heavy and shining, from the state science fair I had just won. My project on sustainable agriculture had beaten out hundreds of other students. I held it out, my hand trembling slightly. My father took it, his gaze barely flickering over its surface. He held it for a moment, his expression indifferent, before placing it on the table with a quiet clink. It lay there, next to a gravy-stained napkin. "That's nice, honey," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any real emotion. "But things like this won't help you find a good husband." He then gestured with his chin toward the kitchen, which was piled high with dirty dishes. "Now be a good girl and go help your mother with that mess." I looked over at Julian. He was leaning back in his chair, swirling the last of his iced tea in his glass, that same smug smirk playing on his lips. In that moment, I felt myself disappear. I was invisible, a ghost in my own home, my existence only validated by my ability to serve his brilliance. The medal on the table seemed to mock me, a symbol of an achievement that meant nothing in this world. It was a year later that I dropped my own bomb. The day I announced my decision to enlist in the Army, with the ultimate goal of joining the Special Forces, was the day I officially declared war on the life they had planned for me. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My mother burst into tears. "That's no place for a nice girl," she sobbed, as if I'd announced I was joining a gang. My father slammed his hand on the dining table, making the silverware jump. "You're embarrassing this family, Carly. Do you hear me?" But the cruelest cut, the one that festered for years, came from Julian. He pulled me aside into the hallway, his voice a low, venomous whisper, so our parents couldn't hear. "What do you think you're doing, playing Rambo?" he hissed, his eyes glinting with malice. "You're just a little country girl, Carly. You're going to fail. You're going to wash out and come crawling back here with your tail between your legs. And when you do, don't you dare expect me to be the one to pick you up." That threat wasn't a deterrent. It was a promise. It became a curse I swore to myself I would break. I would never crawl back. I would never give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I had to get out. Not just from that house, but from the destiny they had written for me. But as I walked away, a question echoed in my mind. If family wasn't my place, then where in the world did I belong? My answer to that question wasn't found in a place of comfort. It was forged in hell. Specifically the hell known as Robin's Sage, the final grueling test for Special Forces candidates, set in the unforgiving wilderness of North Carolina. My new home was Fort Liberty, then known as Fort Bragg, a world away from my family's judgment. I was one of a handful of women in the program. That meant I carried the same 80-pound rucksack as men who were twice my size. It meant trudging for miles through dense, swampy forests in the dead of night, the humidity so thick it felt like breathing water. It meant learning to survive with nothing but a K-bar knife and whatever the earth begrudgingly offered. Every morning I'd wake up in my cot with a body that screamed in protest. Every muscle ached. My feet were a raw mess of blisters inside my damp boots, and my mind was worn down to a nub of pure, exhausted will. The instructors watched me with skeptical eyes, their expressions a constant challenge, as if they were just waiting for the moment I would finally break. And through it all, Julian's voice was a ghost that haunted me, whispering on the wind, "You're going to fail." The doubt from others was more direct. I remember one afternoon, during a land navigation exercise, one of my teammates, a big guy from California, looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't the place for you, Benson. Go home and cook." A fire ignited in my gut, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just fell silent, my grip tightening on the cool metal of my compass until my knuckles were white. My answer wouldn't be in words, it would be in action. Later that night, a small miscalculation threw our entire squad off course. Panic began to set in as the moon disappeared behind thick clouds. While the others argued, I stayed quiet, trusting my training. I studied the terrain, the stars, the subtle shifts in the wind. Relying on my own meticulous observation and skill, I found the correct bearing. I led them back, navigating through the darkness, and we reached the rendezvous point safely just before dawn. I never said, "I told you so." I didn't have to. I just looked directly at the soldier who'd told me to go home. In his tired, dirt-streaked face, I saw it, a flicker of grudging respect. It was the first victory that was truly mine, one not with brute strength, but with quiet persistence and a mind that refused to quit. But even as I was forging a new version of myself, the ghost of my old life would find me. One evening, after a brutal 72-hour survival exercise without sleep, I stumbled back to my tent, covered head to toe in mud and grime. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to hear a familiar voice, so I scraped together what little energy I had and made a call home. My mother picked up. I told her, my voice raspy with exhaustion, that I had just passed one of the hardest tests of my life. But it was as if she didn't hear me. The words didn't register. Her concern was immediate, but misplaced. "Oh, honey, are you eating enough?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. "A girl can't look so thin and dark from the sun. Who would want you like that?" Before I could even process the sting of her words, she changed the subject entirely. "Oh, I have to tell you, Julian and Serafina just got back from a trip to the Caribbean. They had the most wonderful time. She looks so happy, Carly. I think she might have some good news for us soon." I stood there, holding the phone, the sounds of the base camp fading into a dull roar in my ears. I hung up, the emptiness a familiar ache in my chest. They lived in another world, a world where my life and death struggles were worth less than a luxury vacation, a world where my triumphs were invisible. I hung up, the emptiness a familiar ache in my chest. They lived in another world, but it was here, in the dirt and the exhaustion, that I learned I wasn't truly alone. It was in those years, in the sweat and the mud, that I found them, my real family. My family wasn't one of blood, it was one of choice, forged in the dust and danger of northern Syria. A bond sealed not by genetics, but by shared risk and mutual respect. This was the place where I finally understood what belonging felt like. I remember one particular night with a clarity that still brings a lump to my throat. I was at a dusty remote outpost, a collection of sandbags and makeshift buildings, under a vast star-filled sky. The air was still humming with the electric tension from a mortar attack earlier that day. The blast had rattled more than just the compound walls. It had shaken loose the nightmares from the IED explosion that had ended my field career and sent me to a desk. I was sitting alone in the makeshift mess hall, a tent with folding tables and the constant smell of diesel fuel. I was nursing a cup of lukewarm, gritty coffee, my hands still trembling slightly as I tried to will them to be steady. I was trying to hold myself together, piece by piece, fighting the invisible war inside my own head. That's when my commanding officer, Major Kalen Rourke, walked in. He was a quiet, solid man from the mountains of Colorado, with eyes that had seen too much but hadn't lost their kindness. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer any of the empty, well-meaning platitudes people use when they're faced with a pain they don't understand. He simply poured himself a cup of the same terrible coffee, pulled up a chair across from my table, and sat down. For a long moment, we sat in a shared, comfortable silence. Then he started telling me a ridiculously bad joke about the first time he went deep-sea fishing off the Outer Banks in North Carolina and ended up feeding the sharks his entire lunch. His delivery was deadpan, his timing was terrible, and the punchline was weak. It wasn't funny at all, but I felt the tight, cold knot in my chest begin to loosen, just a fraction. We sat there for nearly an hour, the silence between his rambling stories far more meaningful than any conversation could have been. In that quiet space, I felt something I had craved my entire life, a profound, unspoken understanding, a silent acceptance. I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to explain my ghosts. I was just allowed to be. That was the family I had found. It was a family that showed its love not through grand, hollow declarations, but through small, sacred acts of solidarity. My 33rd birthday found me at another barren, isolated base. I expected the day to pass like any other, marked only by the relentless sun and the fine, pervasive dust that got into everything. But that night, my team, my brothers, surprised me. They had scraped together flour and jam packets from their MREs, their military rations, and, with the ingenuity of soldiers, had created something that vaguely resembled a cake. For a candle, they'd stuck an empty .50 caliber bullet casing into the center of the lumpy, dense creation. They gathered around me in our tent, their faces lit by a single lantern, and launched into the most off-key, tone-deaf rendition of Happy Birthday I had ever heard. It was beautiful. Corporal Leo Santiago, the young, eternally optimistic kid from Texas with a heart as big as his home state, handed me his gift. It was a smooth, flat rock he'd picked up from the desert floor. "It kinda looks like North Carolina, ma'am," he'd said with a sheepish grin. I closed my hand around the cool stone. It was the most thoughtful, most meaningful birthday present I had ever received in my life. In that moment, surrounded by the constant threat of bombs and bullets, I knew I was home. These men didn't share my bloodline, but they held my heart. They saw me, not as a woman or an officer, but simply as one of their own. It was in the midst of this profound, healing warmth that a letter from Julian arrived, delivered through the military mail system. It felt like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. My heart leaped when I saw his familiar sloping handwriting on the envelope. I was starved for a real connection to my old life, hoping for words of encouragement, a simple question about my safety, anything to bridge the gap between my two worlds. But there were none. After a few lines of polite, distant small talk about the weather back home, he got to the real point of his letter. His tone shifted to one of feigned, casual curiosity. "I have a friend who's looking to invest in the reconstruction sector over there," he wrote. "He's a good guy, just trying to do some good in the world. I was wondering, do you know which supply routes are the most secure? Or if there are any local contractors that are particularly reliable?" At the time, cocooned in the trust of my unit, my guard was completely down. I saw a brother asking for a simple favor, trying to help a friend. I replied with the information he wanted, innocently and freely. Glad to feel useful to him for once. I had no idea I wasn't helping a friend. I was feeding intelligence to a vulture, a predator circling a war zone, waiting to pick the bones of the conflict clean. That letter, which I had read as a sign of his interest, was actually the first brick he laid in the foundation of his betrayal. I folded that letter and put it away, never realizing I had just handed my brother the keys to my own destruction. The warmth of my chosen family had made me forget the coldness of the one I was born into. I wonder, have you ever felt that? Have you ever been so happy, so accepted by the people you chose, that you let your guard down, forgetting the ones who hurt you in the first place? It was a mistake I wouldn't realize until years later, when my phone rang. It was Serafina, her voice dripping with fake concern, telling me she was worried about my troubling state of mind and that she had found a specialist for me to talk to. After my medical discharge, I returned to Fayetteville, North Carolina. I came back with the scars you could see and the ones you couldn't. The first thing I did, before even fully unpacking, was drive to the old house, the one nestled at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I needed to stand on solid ground, on the one piece of earth that had always been my family's. But when I turned onto the familiar gravel road, my heart seized. Stuck into the front lawn, stark and clinical, was a red and white sold sign from a Raleigh real estate agency. A strange minivan was parked in the driveway, its back hatch open as a young family I'd never seen before unloaded boxes. The world tilted on its axis. My hands were shaking as I dialed Julian's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice infuriatingly casual. "Oh, that," he said when I asked him, my own voice trembling with disbelief. "Yeah, I forgot to tell you. You signed the power of attorney over to me when you were at Walter Reed. Don't you remember? You said you didn't want the burden of the house anymore." I froze. I knew, with a certainty that was bone deep, that I had never signed such a thing. But his voice, it was so calm, so certain. And my own memory, fractured and unreliable from the TBI, was a landscape of fog and shadows. The doctors had warned me about memory gaps. Julian knew that. He was using my own injury as a weapon against me, planting a terrible seed of doubt. Did I really forget? Could I have signed it in a moment of confusion and just lost it? He was making me question my own mind, and it was terrifying. A few weeks later, the next phase of their campaign began. Serafina called, her voice sweet as honey. She invited me to a charity tea at her country club in Chapel Hill. "It will be good for you, Carly," she cooed, "to get out, to start reintegrating into life again." Like a fool starved for any semblance of family connection, I agreed. I wore a simple dress, the nicest thing I owned, but I felt completely out of place the moment I walked in. I was a crow in a flock of peacocks, surrounded by a sea of pastel silk, gleaming diamonds, and the quiet hum of old money. Serafina immediately took my arm, parading me around her circle of wealthy friends. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my sister-in-law, Carly," she announced, her smile dripping with manufactured sympathy. "She's just returned from her service. She's a true hero, but she's been through so much. We all need to be very patient and understanding with her." Her words hung in the air, coating me in a layer of pity. In front of everyone, she treated me like a fragile child, a wounded patient who needed special care. They looked at me with a mixture of morbid curiosity and condescending concern, as if I were an exhibit at a zoo. I wasn't a person to them, I was a project. Serafina's personal charity case, a way for her to showcase her own compassion and generosity. I stood there, smiling stiffly, feeling my skin crawl. The final act of their play was staged a week later. Julian and Serafina came to my small Fayetteville apartment, bearing a gift basket from Whole Foods, overflowing with organic snacks and expensive juices. It was a perfect prop. "We're really worried about you, Carly," Julian said, placing a heavy proprietary hand on my shoulder. "The nightmares, the confusion. You can't go through this alone." Serafina chimed in, her voice a soft, concerned whisper. "There's an excellent specialist, a friend of the family, actually. He could help you. It's just a conversation, nothing intimidating." I was tired. I was lonely. And that seed of doubt Julian had planted about the house sale had taken root, making me question everything. Exhausted and vulnerable, I agreed. The meeting wasn't in a sterile clinic. It was at a quiet corner table in a Starbucks, designed to feel informal and safe. The man was kind, his questions gentle. He asked about my service, about my losses, about the feeling of being lost between two worlds. And I, desperate to be understood, opened up. I spoke honestly about the pain, the grief, the survivor's guilt that weighed on me every single day. I told him about Leo Santiago. I told him about the nightmares. I laid my soul bare on that coffee-stained table. I never saw the tiny recording device resting by his phone. I had no idea that every vulnerable word, every pained confession, was being captured. I didn't know that my grief would be edited, my words twisted, my trauma reframed and weaponized to be used as evidence against me in a court of law. The trap had been set perfectly, and I, tired, lonely, and doubting my own mind, had walked right into it. The final proof of their campaign arrived a month later. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a visit. It was a thick, formal envelope delivered by certified mail. Inside was a court summons. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October, a day with a crisp autumn chill that did nothing to cool the sudden fire in my veins. It wasn't a phone call or a text message. It was a thick, formal envelope delivered by the mailman, the kind that only brings bad news. Inside was the court summons. I sank onto my sofa, the papers trembling in my hand, my heart pounding a frantic, suffocating rhythm against my ribs. I read every single word, the cold, dry legalese, a stark contrast to the boiling fury rising inside me. The petition, filed by Julian Vance and Serafina Vance, to establish a legal guardianship over Carly Benson. The fake psychiatric report was attached as Exhibit A, its clinical terms a grotesque mockery of my reality. It was all there, laid out in black and white, a meticulously crafted legal assault. Every sweet word from Serafina, every concerned visit from Julian, every calculated gesture of kindness. It was all part of this. A systematic, cold-blooded campaign to strip me of my autonomy, to have me legally declared incompetent, to turn me, a major in the United States Army, into a child who couldn't manage her own affairs. They didn't just want my inheritance or the money from the house. They wanted my life. They wanted to erase Major Carly Benson and leave nothing but a hollow, pitiful shell they could control. A broken toy to be put away on a shelf. As if on cue, summoned by the sheer force of my rage, my phone rang. The screen flashed with Julian's name. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then a cold calm washed over me. I answered. The mask was completely off. The concerned brother was gone, replaced by the man who had always been lurking underneath. His voice was cold, commanding, stripped of all pretense. "You got the papers, then?" he asked. There was no greeting, no preamble, just the voice of a man issuing an order. "Just sign the inheritance waiver, Carly. Make this easy on everyone. Consider it me helping you out." A strangled, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Helping me? You call this helping me?" "Yes, helping you. You're not well. You need someone to look after you." "No," I said, the words small but solid as a rock. "I won't sign anything." And that's when the monster he'd kept hidden behind expensive suits and charming smiles finally broke free of its cage. "Don't you dare act so high and mighty," he roared, his voice exploding through the phone, so loud it made my ear ring with a sharp, piercing pain. "You're nothing but a broken soldier, Carly. A damaged, pathetic burden on this family. If it wasn't for me cleaning up your messes, you'd be nothing. You should be on your knees, thanking me for even bothering with you." He slammed the phone down. The click was final, an executioner's blade falling. The silence that followed was 1,000 times more deafening than his screams. His words hung in the air of my small apartment, invisible but toxic. Broken soldier, burden, damaged. He had taken my service, my sacrifice, my deepest source of pride, the very thing I had built myself upon when he and my parents had left me with nothing, and he had twisted it into a slur. That was it. That was the line. The final, unforgivable boundary had been crossed. The part of me that had been hurt, that had been sad, that had been confused, it died in that moment. Something new, something cold and hard, took its place. My eyes fell upon the mantelpiece above my small, unused fireplace. There, folded into a perfect, crisp triangle, was the American flag that had draped Corporal Leo Santiago's casket. I walked over to it, my steps steady, my purpose clear. I reached out and let my fingertips trace the rough texture of the embroidered stars. Each star represented a state, a piece of the nation we had sworn to protect. Leo had died for that oath. I had lived for it. I remembered the day I took that oath, my hand raised, my voice clear and strong. I remembered the words etched into my soul, that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Domestic. In that instant, everything became crystal clear. The fog of pain and confusion vanished, burned away by a sudden, righteous fury. Julian wasn't just a cruel brother anymore. He was a domestic enemy, an enemy to my freedom, my honor, my very identity. He was trying to destroy everything I had fought to protect, everything Leo had died to uphold. The hot, chaotic rage that had been burning inside me suddenly cooled. It solidified, transforming into a block of ice, cold, sharp, and focused. There were no more tears. There was no more pain. There was only resolve, a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in my bones. General Patton once said, "Never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity." I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I was going to write my own rules of engagement. I would not let him win. I pulled out my phone, my movements calm and deliberate. It was time to call my real family. I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over the name. Colonel Anya Sharma. I would not be silent anymore. I would not let him win. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was a mission. My call to Colonel Anya Sharma, stationed at SOCOM headquarters in Tampa, Florida, was not one of panic. The grief and rage had cooled into a laser-focused objective. I spoke to her the way I was trained to, delivering an intelligence report, clear, concise, and devoid of emotion. "Colonel, this is Major Benson," I began. "I have credible reason to believe that a U.S. citizen has gained unauthorized access to secure SOCOM systems, using my credentials to engage in defense contract fraud related to Operation Cerberus. This same subject is currently attempting to legally neutralize me through a petition of incompetence." There was a brief, crackling silence on the other end of the line. I could picture her in her office, her posture straight, her mind processing every word. Then her voice came back, solid and unwavering, without a hint of doubt. "I understand, Major. Send me everything you have through encrypted channels. Do not discuss this with anyone else. We'll handle it." "We'll handle it." Those 3 words were more powerful than any comforting phrase or expression of sympathy. The weight on my shoulders didn't vanish, but it shifted. I was no longer a lone, broken soldier. I was part of a unit again. I was no longer alone. My small Fayetteville apartment transformed into a tactical operations center. The curtains were drawn. My kitchen table became a landscape of laptops, documents, and half-empty cups of black coffee. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Adrenaline and caffeine were my fuel. With the remote support of a cyber forensics team that Major Rourke had assigned to me, I began the digital excavation of my brother's life. This was my new battlefield. I remembered a core principle of psychological operations, or SWIOP. The truth is the most effective weapon. I wasn't going to fight Julian with lies or tricks. I was going to dismantle his world with cold, hard, undeniable facts. The work was grueling. I spent hours tracing IP addresses, following digital breadcrumbs that led from my stolen credentials back to a server routed through 3 different countries, finally terminating at a laptop in a Raleigh high-rise. I cross-referenced flight manifests with login times. I painstakingly combed through Julian's social media, looking for any inconsistencies. I started digging into his finances, peeling back the layers of his carefully constructed empire. With the help of the forensics team, we unraveled a complex web of shell companies registered in Delaware, each one designed to launder money from fraudulent government contracts. Then I went through my own history, searching old emails, photos, anything that could connect the dots. The most painful discovery came late one night, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. A digital timestamp. Julian had accessed the secure military logistics system using my login details on a specific date, the 5th anniversary of our parents' death. I remembered that day. I had been stationed in Afghanistan. Overwhelmed with a wave of homesickness and grief, I had written him a long, heartfelt email, telling him how much I missed them, how lonely I felt so far from home. And while I was pouring my heart out to him, he was on the other side of the world, using my moment of vulnerability as a cover to commit his crimes. He was stealing from the same government I was serving, using my name as his key. The betrayal was so profound, so personal, it took my breath away. But I didn't cry. I just saved the access log as another piece of evidence. The final damning piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. A retired logistics sergeant who had served at a supply depot in Syria, a man I'd only known as Gunny, had contacted Major Rourke. He'd always felt that something was off about a particular shipping manifest from years ago, so he'd kept a personal copy. He emailed it to me. I opened the file. There it was, a shipping invoice with my forged signature at the bottom. It detailed a large shipment of critical medical supplies, including quick-clot combat gauze. A handwritten note in the margin, initialed by a subcontractor I now knew was one of Julian's shell companies, authorized a last-minute diversion of the cargo to a non-military drop point. My blood ran cold. I knew the date on that manifest. It was the day our patrol was ambushed, the day we were desperately short on trauma supplies, the day I held Leo Santiago in my arms as he bled out. because we didn't have enough of the very gauze that was on that diverted shipment. Everything clicked into place. The fraud, the lies, the stolen money. It all led back to this. It led back to the death of my brother in arms. My fight was no longer just for my name or my freedom. It was for Leo. I printed everything. The financial reports from the shell companies, the IP logs, the damning shipping manifest, the official letter from SOCOM, formally opening an investigation. Page after page, I stacked the evidence of Julian's treason on my table. I slid the entire stack into a thick brown manila envelope. I sealed it shut, pressing down firmly, then took a roll of red evidence tape and secured the flap. I ran my finger over the red tape sealing the thick manila envelope. Inside wasn't just paper. It was my 14 years of service. It was justice for the men who had fallen beside me. And it was the final, undeniable end to Julian's lies. We were back in the courtroom. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. After Julian's tearful performance, his slick Raleigh lawyer rose to his feet, a look of supreme confidence on his face. He smoothed his suit jacket and addressed the judge with the condescending tone of a man who believed he had already won. "Your Honor," he began, his voice oozing with false sympathy. "With this undeniable evidence of Ms. Benson's tragic decline, it's clear that my client has acted only out of profound love and concern. It is equally clear that Ms. Benson is not competent to represent herself or her own best interests." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words hang in the air. "We therefore move for a summary judgment. Let's end this unnecessary suffering for her and for her loving family today." The judge, an older man with tired eyes, seemed convinced. He nodded slowly, his gaze softening with pity as he looked at me. He had bought their entire story. He turned his attention to me, his voice gentle, as if speaking to a confused child. "Ms. Benson," he said, leaning forward, "this is your last opportunity. Do you have any response to this motion?" The entire courtroom held its breath. All eyes were on me. They were expecting tears, a desperate plea, a frantic outburst, a final, complete collapse that would confirm their narrative. I looked at Julian and Serafina. They were watching me with the triumphant, predatory eyes of winners who had just cornered their prey. I didn't say a word. Instead, I calmly reached down and unlatched my leather briefcase. My movements were slow, deliberate, measured. I pulled out the thick brown manila envelope, its weight a comforting anchor in my hand. I placed it on the table in front of me and pushed it forward, sliding it across the polished wood toward the bailiff. "Your Honor," I said, my voice even and clear, cutting through the silence, "I would like to submit this into evidence." The judge frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. This was an unscheduled interruption to his tidy conclusion, but procedure was procedure. He sighed and took the envelope from the bailiff. He tore open the seal, his movements impatient. He pulled out the first document, a financial statement, and glanced at it, his expression unchanged. But then he flipped to the second page. His eyes widened. He saw the official seal of the United States Special Operations Command. His demeanor shifted instantly. The impatience vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense focus. He began to read faster. His fingers, which had been tapping idly on his desk, now trembled slightly as they turned the pages. I watched his face cycle through a storm of emotions, from annoyance to surprise, from surprise to shock, from shock to a dawning, horrified understanding. And finally, his expression settled into a cold, hard fury. He looked up from the papers, his gaze bypassing me entirely, and locking onto my brother. Julian, sensing the shift in the room, began to look uneasy. Bang! The judge slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Bailiff, lock the doors to this courtroom. No one enters, no one leaves, he commanded, his voice booming with a newfound authority. Just as the lock clicked shut, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 12 Green Berets, dressed in their full operational combat uniforms, filed into the room. They moved with a silent, disciplined power that sucked the air out of the space. They didn't look at the judge, the lawyers, or the shocked faces in the gallery. They moved in perfect formation, creating a solid, unbreachable wall of green and brown behind my chair. They were a force of nature. Major Kalen Rourke emerged from their ranks. He strode to the front, gave a crisp salute to the judge, and then turned to face my brother. The atmosphere in the room had become electric, charged with a terrible, beautiful justice. Julian Vance, Major Rourke declared, his voice ringing with authority, resonating in every corner of the room. You are being detained pursuant to an investigation by the Department of Defense and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for violations of the False Claims Act, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States. Julian's face went chalk white. The color drained from him as if a plug had been pulled. This is ridiculous, he stammered, looking wildly from Rourke to the judge. She's insane. She's making this all up. His words died in his throat. He had no more lines in this play. Serafina let out a small, strangled gasp, her silk handkerchief fluttering from her numb fingers to the floor. Her perfect, composed world had just been shattered into a million pieces. 2 military police officers, who had entered with the soldiers, stepped forward. One began reading Julian his Miranda rights in a calm, monotonous tone, while the other took his arm, turned him around, and snapped a pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. Click. The sharp, metallic sound cut through the stunned silence of the courtroom. It was cold. It was final. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. The sound of justice. As they led him away, his expensive suit now looking like a cheap costume, his eyes met mine one last time. They were filled with a desperate, pleading confusion. He had never imagined a world where he wasn't the one in control. The last time you called me your little sister, Julian, I said, my voice steady and clear, speaking for the first time since this all began. You were lying then too. After Julian was led away in handcuffs, a stunned, deafening silence descended upon the courtroom. The drama was over. The performance had ended in a spectacular implosion. In the front row, Serafina had collapsed into her chair, no longer acting, her face a mask of raw, naked panic, as her perfect world crumbled. I didn't look at her. I didn't watch my brother's retreating back as he was escorted out, a cheap suit now his prison uniform. My mission was complete. I simply stood, turned to Major Rourke and the 12 silent soldiers, standing guard behind me, and gave them a single, grateful nod. Then I walked out of the courtroom alone, the heavy doors closing behind me with a soft, final thud. I didn't feel the exhilarating rush of victory I had expected. There was no elation, no triumphant joy. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. It was the feeling every soldier knows, the profound, ringing quiet after the battle is won. Victory always smells a little like gunpowder and loss, and this one was no different. It was the cost of severing a part of myself, even if that part was poisoned. I didn't go home. I got in my car and just drove east, away from the courthouse, away from Fayetteville. I drove for hours, watching the landscape change from cityscapes to pine forests until the scent of pine needles finally gave way to the sharp, clean smell of salt and sea. I ended up in Emerald Isle, a familiar stretch of the North Carolina coast. I took off my shoes and sat on the cool, damp sand, watching the relentless rhythm of the waves crashing onto the shore, one after another, as if trying to wash the world clean. I let the sound fill the emptiness inside me. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from my lawyer. Inside were the official documents transferring the deed of my parents' house back into my name. Tucked alongside the legal papers was another, smaller envelope made of expensive, cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was elegant and looping. It was from Serafina. I steeled myself, preparing for a torrent of excuses, perhaps even a well-crafted, insincere apology. I was wrong. The letter was a masterpiece of cowardice, a manifesto of blame-shifting. "Dearest Carly," it began. "I don't know what to say. I feel so deceived. Julian painted such a different, frightening picture of your condition. As his wife, I felt it was my duty to protect our family from what he told me was an inevitable ruin. He manipulated me just as he manipulated you." She took no responsibility, not for the lies, not for the humiliation at the tea party, not for the role she had played with such perfection. The final sentence was the pinnacle of her shamelessness. "I hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive your brother for his shortcomings." I finished reading and felt nothing. The anger I expected didn't come. The rage was gone, burned out. All I felt was a cold, clinical pity for a woman so dedicated to her own victimhood. I slowly crumpled the thick, expensive paper in my fist, the sharp edges digging into my palm until it was a tight ball. Then I walked to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash. The final loose end presented itself a few days after. I returned from a quiet ceremony at the Pentagon, where I was formally decorated for my contributions. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. It was Serafina. Her voice was thick with manufactured sobs, a performance I now recognized all too well. "Carly, please," she wept. "I need to talk to you. For the children, they ask about their uncle. Julian made a terrible mistake, but he's your brother." I let her speak, letting the torrent of excuses and pleas wash over me without effect. Her words were just noise now, the meaningless static of a dead channel. When she finally paused to take a breath, her sobs subsiding, I spoke. I took a deep, steadying breath, my voice calm and clear, free of anger or malice. It was the voice of a commander making a final, unappealable decision. "Serafina," I said, "you are no longer a part of my family. Do not ever call me again." I hung up before she could respond and immediately blocked her number. This wasn't an act of hatred, it was an act of self-preservation. In the quiet days following the trial, I had started reading. I found the work of Brené Brown, who wrote about vulnerability, courage, and the power of owning your own story. She wrote that true courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about facing the truth of your story. My story with Julian and Serafina was one of pain and betrayal, and it was over. I couldn't write a new chapter for my life if I kept rereading the old ones. It was time to close that book, permanently. The old house was mine again, the deed sitting on my coffee table, a silent testament to the battle I had won. The house had returned, but the family hadn't. And as I looked out at the quiet street, at the setting sun casting long shadows on the lawn where a sold sign once stood, I realized Maybe I never really had a family in that way at all. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. With the settlement money from the lawsuit, I could have bought a luxury condo in Raleigh, a place with skyline views and concierge service. I could have moved anywhere, started a new life, and left North Carolina and all its ghosts behind me. Instead, I went home. I went back to the plot of land at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But I didn't rebuild the old house. Its foundation was tainted with too many painful memories. I tore it all down and started from scratch. I built something new. I built the Overwatch Outpost. It wasn't a single house, but a series of simple, cozy timber cabins, with wide porches and large windows that looked out onto the majestic, rolling peaks of the mountains. There were no rigid rules here, no mandatory therapy sessions or clinical evaluations. There was just fresh mountain air, hot coffee always brewing, and comfortable armchairs placed around a large stone fireplace. The silence was respected, a shared understanding among people who knew that sometimes the most healing thing is to not have to speak at all. It was designed to be a safe haven for veterans, a place where they could come to take off their armor for a little while without fear of judgment, a place to breathe. Every day, I worked on that land. I learned to plant a garden, to mend a fence, to stack firewood for the winter. My hands became calloused and dirty with the soil of my home, but for the first time in my life, my soul felt clean. The scientists call it post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that the struggle with adversity can lead to a profound positive transformation. I was living proof. My scars were no longer just marks of pain, they were a map that led me here. It was from a small, soundproofed room in the main cabin that I started my late-night podcast. I called it The Watch. For the first broadcast, I had no script, no notes. I just sat in front of the microphone and spoke from the heart. I talked about what it feels like to be told your pain isn't real. I talked about being called crazy, about the weaponization of a diagnosis, and about using silence as a shield for survival. If you're out there listening tonight, I said, my voice low and steady, if you have ever been told that what you carry inside you is an illusion, that your memories are a fabrication, that your grief is an overreaction, I want you to know this. I see you, I believe you, and you are not alone. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Emails poured in from all over the country. Stories from veterans of every conflict, from Vietnam to Iraq. Men and women who had carried their burdens in silence for decades. They told me about their own Julians, their own Seraphinas, the people who had dismissed their invisible wounds. They said that for the first time they felt heard, they felt seen. One morning, just before dawn, I was sitting on the porch of the main cabin, wrapped in a blanket, a warm mug of tea cradled in my hands. I watched the sun begin its slow ascent, painting the dark peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains in soft shades of pink and orange. A young Marine, a veteran of Fallujah, who hadn't spoken more than 2 words in the entire week he'd been at the outpost, came out and sat in the chair beside me. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time, just watching the day be born. Then he quietly pointed to a wooden plaque I had hung on the wall above the door. It was a verse from Psalm 23, one that had been my mantra through the darkest times. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. I've been in that valley, Major, he said, his voice raspy from disuse. But I think I'm finally on the other side. I looked at him, and a genuine, unforced smile spread across my face, For the first time in what felt like years, the hollowness inside me was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady warmth. "Me too, brother," I said softly. "Me too." Julian had tried to erase me. He had tried to break me down, to take everything from me until I was nothing. But in the end, all his lies and all his cruelty only helped me find my true mission. He took my family, but he gave me a far, far bigger one in its place. And that's my story, or at least the part of it that taught me the most important lesson. My mission now isn't just to speak, it's to listen. If any part of my journey resonated with you, if you have ever felt that your pain was dismissed or your truth was denied, know that this space is for you. Your story matters. I truly believe that. Share your experience in the comments below, because I promise you, someone out there needs to hear it to know they aren't alone. And if you believe in the power of these stories, subscribe to the channel. Let's continue to build this community together.